The elevator light glowed soft and gold when my daughter laughed. She still works part-time. Still, I pressed the top floor button without a word, my thumb firm, my face unreadable. As the light buzzed in the silence, it flickered off the plaque behind her. ML Holdings. While she fixed her lipstick in the mirror, I watched the name she never bothered to ask about. The same light she stood beneath had always been mine to switch on or off. That's when I knew. The gala she planned would take place in my building, under my name. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Marcia had always been the kind of person who moved with purpose. Even now, as she walked down the hallway towards the break room, the soft click of her heels echoed against the polished floors, steady and sure. Her mind was on the usual, her morning tasks, upcoming meetings, the latest spreadsheet that needed attention. But when she passed the open door of the break room, she heard it. The laughter. Kendall's laugh. The unmistakable sound of her daughter's sharp, quick laugh, cutting through the usual hum of office chatter. Marcia paused for just a fraction of a second, barely a beat. She hadn't planned to stop, hadn't planned to listen. But there it was. She still works part-time. Bless her, Kendall said, her voice bright with that edge of condescension Marcia had learned to live with over the years. A few chuckles followed. She could hear the light-hearted murmurs of Kendall's peers. They thought it was funny, a joke. One of them even chimed in. That's kind of sweet, though. The words drifted through the air like paper, light and meaningless. Except Marcia heard them differently. They weren't just words. They were dismissive, degrading, almost as if her daughter was offering a gift she hadn't earned. Sweet? It wasn't sweet. It was hollow, and it tasted bitter. Marcia's fingers tightened around the handle of her coffee mug, but she didn't stop. She didn't let herself break stride. She kept walking, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had pierced the surface of the carefully constructed calm she carried with her every day. Her heartbeat quickened, her thoughts swirled, but she shut them down, locking them away behind that same quiet calm. Her footsteps remained even, her posture unchanged, as if nothing was amiss. She couldn't afford to let them see. Not yet. She passed the break room door and kept going, taking her usual path toward the elevator. But as she walked, her eyes flicked to the sleek glass-fronted building outside the window, the one that held the company's headquarters, the one that was really hers. ML Holdings. No one in the office knew that, though. No one had ever bothered to ask who really owned the place they worked in. They wouldn't have thought it mattered. They didn't know anything. She took a long sip of her coffee as she reached the elevator. The hot liquid burned her tongue, but it was a sharp, grounding feeling. She welcomed it. A reminder that she was still here, that she hadn't gone anywhere. Not really. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for her floor. She wasn't angry. She had learned long ago not to let anger take hold. Anger was for people who lost control, for people who let their emotions slip out like cracks in glass. She wasn't like that. Not anymore. As the elevator doors closed with a soft chime, Marcia reached into her bag, pulling out her planner, a thick leather-bound book that had served her for years. It was her anchor, her place to record thoughts, tasks, appointments. Today, it would serve a different purpose. She opened it to a blank page and, with a calm precision, wrote a single line. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately across the paper, as if each word were its own small statement of power. They don't know. The elevator reached her floor. She slid the planner back into her bag and stepped out, moving with the same controlled grace she always did. But there was something different now. A slight shift in the air around her. A quiet kind of satisfaction, not yet fully formed, but there. When she reached her desk, The usual buzz of activity was just beginning to pick up. Her colleagues were settling in for their afternoon tasks, their conversations drifting in and out of focus. But Marcia didn't hear them. Not today. Today, she was focused on something else, something deeper, something she hadn't quite figured out until now. Kendall's laugh still echoed in her mind. The sound of it, mocking, dismissive, would be the last thing she'd forget. But it wasn't the laugh itself that mattered. It was the recognition that, for all the years she had spent in this company, for all the work she had done, and all the quiet decisions she had made, Kendall, and the others, still didn't understand. They didn't know who she really was. They didn't know what she had built, what she held. But they would. She'd make sure of that. The building's quiet hum filled the space around her as she turned her attention to the screen in front of her, typing out a few quick responses to emails. But in the back of her mind, she was already planning. The first step had been taken with the simplest of actions, a single line in her planner. Soon, they would all know. And when they did, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. The email sat there, waiting for her to open it. A single subject line that held all the power she needed. 2025, end-of-year celebration. Marcia opened the attachment with a deliberate calm, the crisp sound of her mouse click sharp in the quiet of her office. The flyer was colorful, its bold letters advertising the annual event, complete with sleek graphics, photos of last year's festivities, and a list of sponsors. But there it was, nestled in the fine print at the bottom of the page, the detail that made her pause. The venue, main HQ building, her building. The words felt heavier than they should have. She scanned the rest of the flyer. Nothing else stood out to her. There were the usual embellishments. A night to remember, cocktails and networking, the music, the flashy VIP room. But what caught her attention was the venue. It was the same building her LLC owned, ML Holdings. The same building that everyone in the office thought they rented from a faceless, unknown corporate entity. No one knew her name. No one knew her connection. Not one person had made the connection between Marcia Lynn, the quiet part-timer, and ML Holdings. Not yet. She clicked out of the flyer and pulled up the latest rent payments on her screen. There, in a small line item under ML Holdings, the full payment had been made. No surprise. Tommy had been meticulous about those details. She reached for the phone, dialing his number with practiced efficiency. "Tommy," she said when he answered. "Has rent posted for this month?" "Yep, it's all good," Tommy confirmed. His voice was warm but detached, always matter of fact. "ML Holdings. Full payment. Everything's in order." "Thank you." She hung up without another word, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Everything was in order indeed. Later that evening, after a day full of spreadsheets, meetings, and emails, Marcia found herself sitting at dinner with Kendall at their usual restaurant. Kendall was rattling on about the company party with all the enthusiasm of a seasoned event planner. The conversation flowed around her, but Marcia's attention drifted in and out. "And we're going all out this year, Mom," Kendall said, adjusting her jacket as she scanned her phone. "Big screens, VIP room, the works. You know how it is. People love the glitz. Gotta make it unforgettable." She looked up at her mother, her smile wide, like she had just disclosed some grand secret. "It's going to be amazing." Marcia nodded, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable. The words washed over her, meaningless to the moment unfolding in her mind. "Sounds like it'll be unforgettable," she said, her tone cool, without any inflection that might have tipped Kendall off. But inside, Marcia was already imagining the night, the venue. She could see it now, her initials lighting up the building. ML Holdings, the gala, held not in the shadow of some nameless corporation, but under the true name of the place where the power rested, the place where the real decisions were made, where she held a stake that no one in that room even knew existed. Kendall took a sip of wine, her eyes gleaming with excitement. She didn't know. She didn't see it coming. Marcia's thoughts flickered to the flyer again, the way it had looked in her inbox earlier, how it seemed so innocent, so typical. And yet, the power was in the details, the venue, the name. It would all shift, slowly, in time. And when Kendall walked through those doors, all those lights and big screens would shine under a name that wasn't just corporate. It was hers. The power, the quiet strength, the ownership that no one had ever truly recognized. Until now. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from Erin popped up. Got the latest invite? You good with the updates? Marcia glanced down, her fingers already typing a response, as she sent a quick reply. Perfect. The slight change had been made, the last step before the world would see it. The world would see ML Holdings, in all its understated glory. The building, the venue, the name. Her name. Kendall, oblivious, rattled off more details about the party, her words flowing over Marcia like a river she couldn't escape. But Marcia wasn't listening anymore. She had already moved beyond this dinner, beyond the conversation. She was already picturing that night. The glass doors, the banners, the whispers. Kendall was going to laugh, but the joke would be on her. Marcia took another sip of her wine, her thoughts still on the flyer. Kendall's vision of grandeur would soon be dwarfed by a simple truth she couldn't see. The power, the legacy, the name, all of it would be on display. The night was coming, and Kendall would see exactly who had the real influence in this company. And Marcia wasn't going to let anyone forget it. Marcia sat across from Rick Farrow, her coffee untouched, the quiet hum of the downtown office building surrounding them like a soft current. The late morning light streamed through the large glass windows, casting long shadows across the conference table. Rick sat with his usual confident ease, his fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the side of his mug. He had always been like that, a man who knew his place in the world and made sure everyone else knew it too. But today, the power balance was different. She could feel it, even if he couldn't yet. I'd like no public drama, Marcia said, her voice measured and precise. Just precision. Rick raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair, his eyes narrowing with a playful curiosity. Public drama? He chuckled. What exactly are you talking about, Marcia? She met his gaze without hesitation. The branding for the gala. I want it done right. No fanfare, no announcements. Just a quiet shift. It's time the name means something. He stared at her for a moment, the amusement on his face fading as his mind seemed to process her words. He wasn't a fool. He'd known Marcia longer than anyone in this office, probably longer than anyone realized. He had seen her quiet determination for years, watched her come in every day, handling the small things, the details. He'd never asked too many questions about her private life or what she really did outside of the office, and she had never volunteered the information. But today, something had changed in her. There was a steely edge to her, a quiet confidence that made his stomach stir. They don't know it's you, do they? Rick asked, his voice taking on a knowing tone. He leaned forward slightly, folding his arms on the table. Marcia's lips curled into a small, private smile, the kind that only she could understand. They will, she replied softly, a note of finality in her words that hung in the air between them. He chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to echo through the stillness of the room. I see. Well, whatever you're planning, Marcia, you've got my support. Just don't make a scene, all right? No scenes, she promised, her voice steady, unwavering. Just precision. Rick nodded, clearly satisfied. I'll give the green light. Make sure everything's in place. But just so we're clear, you want it quiet. No one's going to suspect anything. Exactly, Marcia said, her tone clipped. She didn't need any more confirmation than that. She didn't need Rick's approval. It wasn't about that. This was about control. The kind of control that people didn't see coming. Rick pushed his chair back and stood up, extending his hand to her. I'll make the calls. Don't worry, it'll be done right. Marcia shook his hand with the same calm precision she had exhibited since entering the room. Thank you, Rick, she said simply, but there was an underlying weight to her words. He didn't realize how much this gesture would cost him, how much it would cost all of them. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a new message. Tommy's name flashed on the screen. Everything's good to go on the signage. The building name will appear as ML Holdings. Clear and clean. Let me know if you need anything else. Marcia read the message, her fingers lightly tapping against her phone screen as a quiet sense of satisfaction settled in her chest. She wasn't just a part-time operations worker. She wasn't just Kendall's mother. She was the one who made this happen. Quietly, without fanfare. She stepped out of the conference room, the door clicking softly behind her. The office seemed the same, the buzz of activity around her unchanged. But in her mind, everything had shifted. The walls, the ceilings, the very building she walked through. It was all hers. And soon, everyone would know it. She moved down the hallway with the same purposeful stride, the echoes of her heels striking with a sound of finality. As she passed the break room, where Kendall's laugh still seemed to hang in the air, Marcia couldn't help but smile. Soon, the world would see just who really held the power here, and it wouldn't be the flashy lights of the VIP room, the big screens, or the designer dresses that stole the spotlight. It would be her name, her legacy, written in the very walls they all walked through every day. She paused just for a moment by the elevator. There was still more to do, more threads to pull, but it was all falling into place. The building was hers. The gala was hers. The stakes were set. And Kendall? She would learn that power wasn't something you flaunted. It was something you built in silence. Something that, once revealed, left no room for doubt. The elevator doors slid open and Marcia stepped inside, feeling the weight of everything she had quietly, carefully crafted. It was time for the world to see. The digital invite blinked on her screen, ready to be sent out to the entire company. Marcia leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning the familiar formatting of the email template, the festive imagery, the cheerful copy meant to rally the office for another year's end. But this year, it was different. She moved the cursor over the footer, the place where the venue and hosts were listed. Her fingers hovered for a moment, the weight of the decision settling over her. The small, final change, the shift in the narrative, had to be subtle. Nothing too bold, nothing that screamed for attention. It had to feel as though nothing had changed at all, even when everything had. Her finger clicked the mouse with the precision that had come to define her actions. Slowly, methodically, she replaced the existing sponsor information with the new text. She paused for a beat, reading it over. Hosted by ML Holdings. Venue generously provided by Linen Partners. Marcia allowed herself a quiet breath, a small flicker of satisfaction lighting up her chest. It was perfect. The name was there. Her name. The one that had been hidden in the shadows, now cast in bold, unmistakable type. ML Holdings, her LLC. No one would question it now. The world would see it. The name would be whispered in every corner of the office as the party approached, the quiet power of it like an invisible weight hanging in the air. She hit send, the invite disappearing into the corporate ether, on its way to everyone who needed to see it. She sat back and let the silence settle over her. The quiet hum of the office outside her door, the rush of emails still coming in and out, each one oblivious to the shift happening beneath the surface. As Marcia opened her inbox to check for other updates, her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Aaron. Just saw the invite. Looks good, Marcia. I'm sure Kendall won't even notice. Marcia's lips twitched, but she didn't reply. There was no need to rush it. The shift would take time. Let the wheels turn slowly. Let the questions build. Kendall would catch it eventually, but only when it was too late. As the hours ticked by, Marcia watched as her coworkers began to receive the invite. The hum of activity grew around her, but she stayed in her quiet corner, unperturbed. She could almost feel the curiosity rippling through the air. Soon, someone would ask. It was inevitable. And sure enough, it didn't take long before she heard the first whispered voices. "Did you see that?" came a voice from the row of cubicles across from hers. "The gala's being hosted by ML Holdings. Who's that? Is that, is that the building owner?" Another voice followed, filled with quiet surprise. Marcia didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. She could feel the unease, the stir of confusion just below the surface. It was the first crack in the facade, the first sign that the world was beginning to question, to wonder. She didn't rush to answer. Instead, she stayed seated, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face a picture of calm. Let the questions grow. Let them wonder. It was all part of the plan. Kendall's voice broke through the murmurs, louder than the others, the clear sound of her approaching. She swept into the office with her usual grace, a sharp edge to her steps, her heels clicking confidently against the floor. The moment she saw Marcia, her face froze, just for a split second. A slight falter before she quickly recovered. "What is this?" Kendall asked, holding up her phone, her eyes scanning the invite on the screen. Marcia didn't react. She didn't even look up. "What's what?" Kendall frowned, her lips curling slightly. "The gala invite. It says, hosted by ML Holdings. Who's that?" Marcia took a moment to finish the sentence she was typing, deliberately slow, before meeting her daughter's gaze. "Probably some corporate sponsor," she said, her voice calm, casual. "A legacy vendor, maybe. Someone the company's worked with for years." Kendall's eyes narrowed, clearly unconvinced, but she said nothing more. She didn't need to. Her mind was already working, the pieces falling into place, but slowly, slowly. She wasn't ready yet to ask the question that would change everything. Marcia's lips curled into a small, unspoken smile as Kendall turned to walk away, her heels clicking against the floor with more force than necessary. She could feel the tension in the air, the shift in Kendall's posture. It was all too obvious now, the undercurrent of confusion, of suspicion. Soon, Kendall would make the connection. Soon, the whispers would turn to questions. And when the truth came to light, when she finally realized what had happened, the question wouldn't be, "Who's ML Holdings?" but "Why didn't I see it?" And by then, it would be far too late to turn back. Marcia watched her daughter walk out of the office, the door closing softly behind her. The power, the quiet, unseen power was already hers. All that was left now was to wait. And when the time came, Kendall would see exactly who had been in control all along. The evening air had a crisp bite to it as guests began to arrive, their laughter and chatter spilling out into the parking lot, rich with the sounds of anticipation. Marcia stood at the entrance of the building just inside the grand glass doors, watching the first few guests trickle in. There was no grand fanfare, no immediate flashing lights or overly extravagant decorations. Just the soft glow of low-hanging lights, the polished floors, and the sleek, understated elegance of the space she had quietly claimed. The glass doors, which once had simply been an entryway to the corporate headquarters, now bore a subtle but undeniable statement: ML Holdings presents. The banner hung directly above the entrance, simple, direct, and undeniably hers. Her initials, the ones she had hidden in plain sight for years, now stared down at the guests as they passed through. Marcia's heart beat steadily, the hum of excitement from the crowd nothing more than a backdrop to her calm. This night was not about loud gestures or high drama. It was about precision, the kind that only she had mastered. The kind that built power in silence and waited for the world to notice when it was too late. Kendall arrived late, of course. She was always fashionably late, as though her presence alone could make up for the hours lost in preparation. She stepped out of a sleek black car, her designer dress shimmering in the soft lighting, a perfect picture of corporate chic. Her heels clicked confidently on the marble floor as she moved toward the entrance, her phone still in hand as she checked last-minute details for the evening. But then she saw it. The banner. The words ML Holdings presents gleaming in the entryway, in the same silver that danced across the walls inside. Her stride faltered just slightly, just long enough for Marcia to catch it. That fraction of hesitation before her daughter straightened up, forcing the confidence back into her shoulders. Kendall's gaze lingered for a moment too long, a slight crease forming between her brows as she processed what she was seeing. She stopped just inside the door, her eyes scanning the room with barely concealed unease. "Isn't that your mom's initials?" one of her peers asked, their voice carrying just enough for Marcia to hear. The question was innocent enough, but it sliced through the air with a sting that was far from accidental. Kendall's smile faltered for a heartbeat. Her eyes darted to the banner, then to the people around her. Her lips parted as though to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, she laughed. A forced, shallow laugh, the kind she used when she was trying to cover something up. "Oh, probably just a new sponsor, legacy vendor or something," she said, her voice high and brittle, betraying her unease. But even her laughter didn't have its usual ring of certainty. It was hollow, a defense mechanism against the creeping discomfort she felt in the air. She knew, now. Kendall wasn't stupid. Even if she liked to act as though she was above it all. She could feel the shift, the way the attention subtly, almost imperceptibly, turned toward her. Marcia remained where she was, a quiet figure in the background, watching as Kendall continued to survey the scene, her gaze jumping from person to person, trying to reconcile the banner, the event, and her own place in it all. But Marcia didn't step forward. She didn't have to. Kendall's discomfort hung in the air like a cloud, palpable even from a distance. It would all unravel soon, Marcia knew. She could almost hear the questions building in Kendall's mind, the unasked ones, the ones she would keep to herself until it was far too late. Then Erin appeared, gliding over with a calm grace, holding a microphone in one hand. She gave Marcia a small conspiratorial smile. "As our venue host, a few words?" she asked, her voice light, but with an edge of professional warmth. Marcia gave a small nod, the invitation both expected and perfectly timed. The words were already on the tip of her tongue, ready to slip out. She could feel the moment slipping into place, the crowd waiting, the eyes shifting toward her. They had all come here for the show, for the spectacle, for the brand new, glittering event. But Marcia wasn't interested in the bells and whistles. Her gaze drifted over the crowd, knowing full well that Kendall was watching. She was waiting for something, for Marcia to say something, for the moment to be defined. And when it came, it would be silent, precise, and final. She stepped forward, Erin handing her the microphone with a steady hand. Marcia took it with the same grace she had held for years, the same quiet power she had cultivated, hidden beneath the surface. The crowd grew quiet, all eyes now on her, and Marcia let the silence settle for just a heartbeat. Then she spoke. "Welcome," she said, her voice low and steady, filling the room. "I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been a long road to get here, but as you all know, this company is more than just about logistics. It's about legacy. It's about who we are and what we stand for." Her words were simple, yet they cut through the room like a blade. She could feel the eyes on her, the way the room shifted with each phrase. She glanced at Kendall out of the corner of her eye. Her daughter's jaw had tightened, her posture rigid, but she said nothing. She was waiting for the punchline, for the reveal. She knew now, but the timing wasn't right. Not yet. Marcia continued, her voice smooth, deliberate. "I've spent a long time in this business, from food prep to facilities, from the smallest tasks to the highest stakes. And tonight, I stand here not just as an employee, but as someone who helped build this." She paused, letting the words settle. Linen Partners isn't just a name, it's a legacy. She watched as the realization spread slowly across the crowd, like a wave that couldn't be stopped. The eyes flicked to the banner, to ML Holdings, to her name, and then back to her, as the dots connected in silence. Kendall's face drained of color, the breath hitching in her throat. It wasn't the party she had imagined, wasn't the night of champagne and designer dresses. This was something else, something far quieter, far more powerful. And she had no idea what to do with it. Marcia smiled. She didn't have to say another word. The room hummed with a quiet energy as Marcia stood before the crowd, the microphone cool and familiar in her hand. The soft clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, all faded into the background as the guests slowly turned toward her. There was no fanfare, no dramatic lighting. Just a calm presence, a stillness that drew them in without them even realizing it. The night had shifted. The subtle weight of her name was now filling the space between them, hanging in the air like the first breath before a storm. Marcia smiled, just a little, and raised the microphone. The room quieted instinctively. People were still processing, still trying to make sense of what they had seen. The banner, her words, the sharp turn of the evening. And now, she had the floor. She could feel Kendall's eyes on her from across the room, the tension in her posture like a wire pulled taut. Her daughter wasn't alone in her confusion. There were others too, their faces etched with curiosity, their minds trying to connect the dots that Marcia had so carefully placed. "Good evening, everyone." Marcia's voice was calm but steady. A ripple of quiet acknowledgement passed through the room, but it was the weight of her words that would matter now, not the pleasantries. "I want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us tonight. This event, this evening, is a culmination of a lot of hard work and dedication. From the staff to the management, to each of you here, thank you." Her gaze swept across the crowd, allowing the words to settle. They were expecting a speech, of course. But they weren't expecting this. The words were polite, the tone respectful, but Marcia knew she had already seized the moment. This wasn't just about the party. This was her story, and it was one they would now hear. "I've been with this company for a long time," she continued, her voice steady. "A lot of you have worked with me over the years, and you know the journey I've taken." She paused, letting her words resonate. From food prep, to facilities management, to co-owner. The room shifted. She could see the subtle stir of people whispering, their faces blank with the shock of realization. But Marcia didn't rush. She allowed the silence to grow, to sit with them. Let them feel it. Let them understand it. It wasn't about grand gestures, about flashy displays of wealth or status. It was about quiet authority, about knowing when to speak, and when to let the power of your words fill the space. Tonight, they would hear her, not just see her. Marcia's eyes flicked toward Kendall, her daughter's face now pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She was frozen, the proud, confident veneer cracking as the truth slowly crept in. The weight of the realization hung in the air, and Marcia allowed herself a small, private smile. Linen Partners isn't just a name, Marcia said, the words crisp and clear, each syllable cutting through the room like a scalpel. It's a legacy. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Marcia let it linger, the full force of her statement settling over the crowd. She knew the moment had arrived. Kendall's breath caught, her face falling as she connected the dots. Her world, the world she had built on the illusion of status and control, was crumbling in front of her eyes. The applause came slowly at first, a tentative clapping, as if people weren't sure whether it was appropriate yet, whether they should be congratulating her or simply acknowledging her presence. But it grew louder as they understood. As they realized what Marcia had just revealed, the true power behind the scenes. Rick's face was unreadable, but Marcia caught his slight nod from across the room. He hadn't known exactly what she had planned, but he had trusted her. And now, with a single sentence, the whole company knew what Marcia had been building in silence all these years. Kendall, her eyes wide, was still frozen. She didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe for a moment. The realization was sinking in, and it was far more profound than any of the big screens, the designer dresses, or the VIP rooms. This was real power. The kind that had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with control. And for the first time that evening, as Marcia looked at her daughter, she saw the truth reflected in Kendall's eyes. Kendall's empire was nothing more than a house of cards, fragile and easily toppled by the quiet, invisible foundation Marcia had spent years building. Marcia's gaze never wavered from her daughter. She didn't need to say anything more. Kendall had heard her. As the applause died down, Marcia set the microphone back into Aaron's waiting hands, the crowd still murmuring, processing, the power of the moment settling around them. She turned and walked off the stage with the same calm precision she had entered with. The evening was hers now. She had spoken, and they had listened. The room buzzed with energy, the questions starting to form in whispers, the realization spreading like wildfire. Marcia, the quiet part-timer, had just taken control, and everyone would have to reckon with it. Kendall, still frozen in place, didn't move as the crowd began to disperse, the ripple of realization still making its way through the guests. Marcia knew what would happen next. She didn't need to see it unfold. The damage had been done, and the story would carry on without her. But for now, she allowed herself a single moment of satisfaction. Tonight was hers. The night was still, the glow of the parking lot lights casting long shadows across the concrete. The buzz of the event had quieted, the last of the guests drifting off, their voices muffled in the distance. But Marcia, as always, moved with purpose, her heels clicking steadily against the pavement. She had walked past the sleek black cars lined up outside, the luxury vehicles that belonged to people who didn't know they were leaving with more questions than answers. But Marcia was no longer concerned with the whispers behind her. She had already delivered her message. Her work for the night was done. She reached her car, ready for the quiet solitude of the ride home, when she heard the rapid, angry click of heels behind her. The sharp sound of Kendall's footsteps cut through the air, loud and unmistakable. "Mom!" Kendall's voice was clipped, high-pitched with anger. "Wait!" Marcia stopped at her car, her hand resting briefly on the door handle. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The storm was coming, and she knew it was only a matter of time before Kendall caught up. Kendall was breathing hard when she reached her. standing just a few feet away, her face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "You embarrassed me in front of the entire company." Kendall's voice cracked, her words sharp with a fury Marcia had seen too many times before. Marcia's expression remained steady, calm. She knew better than to react impulsively. The emotional storm Kendall was trying to whip up couldn't touch her now. She'd learned to keep her face unreadable, to let the heat of others' anger pass her by like wind against a rock. "You embarrassed yourself when you laughed," Marcia said quietly, her voice unwavering. Kendall's lips parted, ready to lash out again, but something stopped her. The words caught in her throat as the weight of Marcia's calm settled over her. Kendall had thought she was in control. She had expected the typical family drama, the apologies, the yelling, the crying. Instead, she was met with a quiet defiance she wasn't sure how to handle. Marcia let the silence hang for a moment longer before she turned slightly to face her daughter, her eyes sharp, measuring. "I knew exactly what this would look like." Kendall's eyes widened, her jaw tightening in disbelief. "You knew?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a mix of shock and accusation. "You planned this all along?" Marcia didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowly reached for the car door, her fingers curling around the handle with a quiet finality. "Yes." It was a correction. Kendall took a step back, as if the words had physically struck her. The air between them grew tense, thick with the weight of years of unspoken resentment, of expectations, of misunderstandings. Marcia had spent years hidden in the shadows of Kendall's world, watching her daughter build her life on the assumption that the power she wielded was unchallenged, that the system was hers to control. But tonight, Marcia had revealed that she was not merely a bystander. She was the one who held the foundation together, the one who had built the legacy that Kendall had taken for granted. Kendall opened her mouth to speak again, but Marcia had already moved past her, sliding into the car without another word. She hadn't intended for Kendall to understand everything tonight. The point wasn't to have it all out in the open, to draw a line in the sand. It wasn't about a fight. It was about control. About teaching a lesson that would resonate for much longer than the hours of the gala. Kendall would have to live with the realization that the power in their world had always belonged to Marcia, and Kendall's bubble of certainty had just been punctured. The engine hummed to life as Marcia slid the car into gear, her hands steady on the wheel. Through the rear-view mirror, she caught a final glimpse of Kendall standing in the parking lot, her posture rigid, her face pale, caught in the strange moment of not knowing what to do with the truth she'd just learned. It was only then that Marcia allowed herself to take a deep breath, exhaling the tension she had held all night. She glanced at the empty seat beside her, her mind already shifting to the quiet drive home. But just as the thought of solitude began to settle in, her phone buzzed on the dashboard. She glanced at the screen, and the name that flashed there made her pause. It was from Kayla. A simple message. "Are you coming home, Grandma?" Marcia's lips softened. She tapped the screen, typing quickly, her fingers light and sure as she responded. "I'm on my way, sweetheart. I'll be home soon." A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She could feel the weight of the night shifting, changing. The power she'd claimed was more than just a business move. It was the beginning of something new, something Kendall would have to reckon with. But for now, there was only the quiet road ahead, and the warmth of home waiting for her. She drove on, the hum of the car a steady reminder that, no matter how many battles lay ahead, Marcia was the one who had built this road, and no one could take that away from her. The office was quiet, the usual midday hum of activity subdued. The morning's tension still hung in the air, a thick weight that nobody seemed to know how to address. It was as if the entire company had collectively held its breath, waiting for the fallout from the gala, from Marcia's revelation. Kendall walked into the conference room with her head held high, but the lines in her face betrayed her. Her gaze flickered to the long table where Rick Farrow sat, his expression unreadable as usual. Across from him sat Tommy and Aaron, their eyes not meeting hers, but not quite avoiding her either. The silence stretched for a moment too long, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Rick cleared his throat, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a sharpness to it now, something colder than Kendall was used to. "Kendall," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "We need to talk about your behavior last night." Kendall's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of the conversation before the words even came out. She had known this was coming, but it still made her stomach churn. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice flat, but there was a flicker of defensiveness behind the words. Rick leaned forward, his hands steepled in front of him. "The comments you made about your mother," he said carefully. "At the gala, the way you spoke about her." Kendall interrupted, her tone rising. "That was just family drama. It wasn't meant to be a big deal." Rick didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady. "Kendall, it wasn't just family drama. You mocked an investor. An important investor. Someone who not only holds a stake in this company, but who also owns the building we operate in. Do you realize how damaging that is?" The words hit her like a slap. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks as the weight of her own actions started to settle. She had known it was a bad moment when she had laughed it off. But hearing it out loud, seeing it as more than just a careless slip, made her stomach twist. She had never thought of Marcia as anything more than her mother, as someone to look down on, to brush aside. But now that view seemed shattered, and Kendall didn't know how to deal with it. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "It was a joke," she said, her voice harder now, trying to push back the uncomfortable reality. "A harmless joke. It wasn't a big deal." Rick's eyes darkened. "It was a big deal," he said, his voice low, steady. "You crossed a line. You mocked someone who has been integral to this company, someone who has quietly built a foundation you've been benefiting from without even realizing it." His gaze sharpened as he looked at her. "And I won't have that kind of behavior from someone in your position, Kendall." Kendall felt her throat tighten. This wasn't just about the gala or the joke. It was about control, about her position. She had thought she could handle it, that her status would always be unchallenged, but now it was slipping, and she wasn't sure how to get it back. Rick stood up, his chair scraping back loudly. "We're putting you on internal review," he said, his tone cold. "You'll take some time to reflect on your behavior, your leadership, and your attitude. I'm expecting more maturity from you going forward." Kendall's face paled, the reality of what Rick had just said sinking in. Internal review. The words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't quite grasp them. How had it come to this? She had worked so hard to get to where she was. Now, it was like everything she had built was unraveling. "I'm not sure you understand the position you're in right now," Rick continued. "I expected better from you. You have a responsibility to this company, to the people in this room. Your personal issues with your mother can't be aired in public like that, especially not when it's at the cost of the business." Kendall's breath was shallow, her fists clenched tightly in her lap. She wanted to lash out, to defend herself. But the weight of Rick's words held her back. She had never seen him like this. So controlled, so unyielding. It made her feel small, like a child caught in the act of doing something wrong. Finally, she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor as she moved to the door. She didn't look back at Rick or the others. The room was too heavy, too suffocating. As she reached the door, she could feel the eyes of her colleagues following her every move. The moment she stepped out into the hallway, she sucked in a sharp breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't know what to do, how to fix this, how to pull herself back up from this fall. She had always been the one with control, with power, with the upper hand. But now, her entire world felt off balance. And then, as if to punctuate her downfall, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Erin. Marcia sent me a thank you card for the party. She said, "A good night's work is always the quietest one." The words hit Kendall like a blow to the chest. Erin's message was nothing more than a formality, a professional gesture. But it stung. Marcia was still winning. She was still in control. Kendall's hands trembled as she gripped the phone, a feeling of helplessness sweeping over her. She had never felt so powerless in her entire life. But the worst part? She wasn't sure how to fix it. The quiet hum of the office was a familiar soundtrack to Marcia's thoughts as she walked through the hallways of the building she had spent years quietly crafting, investing in, and growing. ML Holdings wasn't just her LLC. It was her legacy, her quiet empire, built brick by brick with careful, deliberate hands. Tonight had only been the beginning, and already the first steps were falling into place. The quarterly reports sat neatly on her desk, their columns filled with numbers that meant more to her than anyone in the company would ever understand. Each number represented another piece of the puzzle, another moment in time where her quiet influence began to settle into something tangible. ML Holdings was about to expand. Marcia clicked open the latest report, her fingers brushing across the screen as she scrolled down the page. The profits from the last quarter were higher than expected. The real estate investments had been paying off far more handsomely than anyone had imagined. And now, the opportunity had come. A building next door to the company's headquarters was up for sale. A prime piece of real estate, one that Marcia had quietly had her eye on for months. She didn't hesitate. The funds were there, more than enough. She made the decision swiftly, just as she had done in every other aspect of her life, calm, cool, with no second thoughts. Within hours, the paperwork was signed and the deed was hers. ML Holdings now owned the building next door. Marcia stood by the window of her office, gazing out at the new acquisition. The building was still empty, its windows dark, but in her mind she could already see it filled with tenants, generating steady income. She would lease it back to the company at a premium market rate. The perfect move to cement her place, to remind them all of just how far her influence stretched. The phone buzzed on her desk, breaking her reverie. It was Tommy. "You did it, didn't you?" he said, his voice low, almost amused. "Bought the building?" Marcia smiled, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. "Yes. It's mine now." "You're the best landlord they don't know they have," Tommy added, his voice warm with approval. Her eyes flickered to the window once more. She had been waiting for the right moment to take this step. Now, it had come, and the power in this small, quiet move was palpable. The company would pay the rent, not knowing that the check they wrote each month went right into her pocket. "I'll send over the leasing agreement once I have the details finalized," Marcia said. "Make sure everything's in place." "Of course," Tommy replied. "You've got them right where you want them. All that's left is to let them figure it out." Marcia ended the call with a soft click, the silence of the office wrapping around her once again. She allowed herself one more moment to savor it. Everything was falling into place, exactly as she had planned. She turned to face the door as it swung open. Erin stepped in, her presence as calm as ever, her expression knowing but professional. "The final paperwork on the building came through. You'll get your first payment next month. Everything looks good on my end." "Good," Marcia said, her tone steady. She appreciated Erin's efficiency, how she never questioned Marcia's decisions, how she simply executed them without hesitation. In many ways, Erin had become an ally, someone who understood that power was rarely seen but always felt. "We'll start the leasing process with the company soon. It'll be good for them to have a little more space to grow." Erin raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile creeping onto her lips. You're playing a long game here, aren't you? Marcia didn't answer immediately, her gaze drifting back to the new building. It wasn't about playing games. It was about creating something enduring, something that would outlast all the transient power plays in the office. I always have, Marcia replied softly. Later that afternoon, as the office buzzed with its usual frenetic energy, Kendall's voice cut through the murmur of conversation, raised slightly in the midst of a discussion. You won't believe it, she said, her voice laced with disbelief. ML Holdings just bought the building next door. Did you know that? Her colleagues nodded, some appearing confused, others impressed by the scale of the move. Wait, one of them said, blinking in surprise. Isn't that the building we've been looking at for expansion? What does that mean for our lease? Kendall frowned, her mind racing, trying to piece the connection together. She hadn't known Marcia had been behind it. She hadn't known that her mother was pulling the strings behind the scenes in such a monumental way. The idea felt like a punch in the gut, a reminder of just how little Kendall had understood about the foundation her own career had been built upon. Kendall turned to her phone, her fingers flying over the screen as she typed in the name, ML Holdings. The first link that appeared was the corporate listing. She clicked it. Her heart stopped when the page loaded. It was all there. The ownership details, the investments, the very building she'd been looking at for months. And at the very bottom, in small, neat letters, was a signature she had overlooked for so long, Marcia Lynn. Kendall's breath caught in her throat. It was one thing to hear the rumors, the whispers about her mother. It was another thing entirely to see it all laid out so starkly. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Marcia had been running the show the entire time, while Kendall had been oblivious, absorbed in her own sense of power. Kendall stared at the screen, the weight of the truth sinking in. The world was shifting beneath her feet, and for the first time, she wasn't sure how to keep her balance. Kendall stood in the doorway of Marcia's office, her breath still shallow from the revelation she had just uncovered. The room felt colder now, the walls pressing in around her as her mind tried to piece everything together. She had come in prepared to confront her mother, ready to demand answers. But now, standing there, she couldn't quite form the words. It wasn't just the building. It wasn't just the gala. It was everything. Everything she had taken for granted about her life, her position, her control. All of it was slipping through her fingers and she couldn't stop it. Marcia sat behind her desk as composed as always. Her gaze never wavered, and she didn't even bother to look up from the report she was reading. The calm in her mother's presence was maddening. How could she be so still when Kendall's entire world was unraveling? Kendall's voice cracked as she spoke, her anger rising to the surface despite her best efforts to stay calm. Why didn't you tell me? Her words were a mix of hurt and disbelief. Why did you hide all of this from me? Marcia set the report down slowly, her movements deliberate, as though she had all the time in the world. Her eyes met Kendall's, cold and unwavering. Long enough to know you didn't deserve to. The words struck Kendall harder than any physical blow could have. She stepped back, her chest tightening as her mind reeled. It was like a punch to the gut, and yet there was no mistaking the finality in her mother's tone. It wasn't just about Marcia hiding things. It was about Kendall not earning the right to know. Don't take this personally, Kendall said quickly, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to keep the edge in it. She wasn't ready to face the reality of what this meant, not yet. It was just a joke, Mom. I didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't supposed to go this far. She took a breath, looking anywhere but at Marcia's face. I didn't think it would make a difference. But Marcia didn't flinch. Her gaze remained as steady as ever. You made it personal when you made it public, she replied, her voice calm and measured. You mocked me in front of everyone, in front of your colleagues, in front of your peers. You humiliated me, Kendall. And for what? A joke? Kendall opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She had expected anger, yes. She had expected a scene. But this was different. It wasn't just anger. It was something far deeper. Something more cutting than she could have imagined. Kendall's hands clenched into fists at her sides. You don't understand, Mom, she said, her voice thick with emotion now. I've worked my ass off for everything. I've sacrificed. Sacrificed? Marcia interrupted, her voice surprisingly gentle but firm. What did you sacrifice? The only thing you've sacrificed is your relationship with your family, your humility, your respect for the people who helped you get where you are. Her eyes bored into Kendall, and the sharpness in her gaze made Kendall feel like a child being scolded. You think this all happened because of your hard work? That you're the one who built this? No, Kendall. You had help. You've had a lot of help. But you've never been willing to see it. Kendall took a step back, her heart pounding. The words Marcia spoke hung in the air, echoing through her mind, and she realized for the first time just how far removed from the truth she had been. Her whole life had been based on a lie that she had told herself to make sense of the world. Her success had always been hers, her achievements earned by her alone. But now, standing there, she couldn't deny it anymore. Her mother had been the one pulling the strings all along. Kendall swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. You're not going to change the trust, are you? Marcia's expression softened for a split second, just long enough for Kendall to see the flicker of something that looked almost like pity in her eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced with the familiar mask of control. I already did, Marcia said simply. The words fell like a stone into the room, sinking deep into Kendall's chest. The trust, the foundation of everything she had assumed she would inherit. Her grip on the company, the power she had thought was hers, was slipping away faster than she could grasp it. Kendall felt a cold, heavy weight settle over her. She had thought she had it all figured out, that she had been in control. But now, the truth was undeniable. It wasn't just the building or the gala or even the trust. It was everything that had been laid out before her, everything she had failed to see. The silence in the room stretched on, suffocating, and Kendall's thoughts raced as she tried to process what had just happened. Her mother's calm, calculated responses had torn through her like a blade. And now, with the weight of the trust change hanging over her, Kendall was left with nothing but the empty realization that she was no longer the one in control. I can't, Kendall started, but her voice faltered. She didn't know what she was trying to say anymore, didn't know how to make it right. Her mind was spinning, and there was no clear path forward. Marcia didn't say another word. She simply looked at her expression unreadable, her gaze sharp. Kendall stood there for a moment longer, her chest tight with the weight of what had been said. Finally, she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. As the door closed behind her, Marcia exhaled slowly. The game had changed, and Kendall had just learned that lesson the hard way. But Marcia knew something her daughter didn't. This was only the beginning. The soft murmur of the office faded as Marcia walked into the lawyer's office, the familiar smell of polished wood and the quiet hum of the air conditioning settling around her like a cocoon. She had done this many times before. Come here, signed papers, negotiated deals. But today felt different. Today, there was a sense of finality in the air, a quiet understanding that this would be a turning point. Her lawyer, Jonathan Wells, was seated behind his desk, a man as meticulous as he was discreet. The stacks of documents in front of him seemed to symbolize the weight of her decision. He was already flipping through the pages when she entered, his movements smooth and practiced. "You're ready, I take it?" Jonathan asked without looking up. His voice was low, controlled, always aware of the gravity of what Marcia asked of him. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice calm, unwavering. It wasn't a question of readiness. It was a necessity. Jonathan nodded, flipping the folder open. He slid a page toward her, along with a pen. The legal jargon was all there, laid out clearly, each clause carefully worded. "This is the revision," he said, his finger tapping the document where her signature was needed. "Kayla will be the primary heir now, and Kendall has been removed for the time being." Marcia's gaze lingered on the words. She had considered this move for a while, long enough to know it was necessary. Kendall had pushed too far, taken too much for granted. It was time for a change, time for her to see that power wasn't a birthright. It was earned. Jonathan's voice broke her concentration. "There's a stipulation here. Kendall won't be able to regain her position unless she offers a formal apology and commits to 2 years of active contribution to a community initiative. Her position, the trust, it's all contingent on that." Marcia leaned back in the chair, her fingers pressing into the wood of the armrests. She felt a cold satisfaction wash over her. The stipulations were clear. Kendall needed to learn the value of humility, of respect. Not just for the company, but for the people who had built it. "What about the timing?" Marcia asked, her voice almost detached. She wasn't in a rush. This wasn't about quick decisions. It was about making the right one. Jonathan glanced up from the document, his face neutral. "The notices will be sent out as soon as you sign. The revisions will be legally binding. The changes will take effect immediately. Do you want Kendall to know now, or should we hold off?" Marcia considered this for a moment, the weight of her decision settling in. She could have informed Kendall directly, had that conversation, explained, justified, but that wasn't the point anymore. Kendall's entitlement needed to be shattered, her illusions broken in a way that would resonate long after the dust settled. Marcia shook her head slowly. "Let her find out in print," she said quietly, her voice steady with resolve. Jonathan's lips quirked into a faint, knowing smile as he slid the document across the desk for her to sign. Marcia's pen moved across the paper without hesitation. Each stroke of ink felt like a small victory, each line a step toward reclaiming the power that had once been so carelessly dismissed. As the last page was signed, Jonathan gathered the papers and slid them into an envelope. "I'll handle the notices," he said. "They'll be sent out by the end of the day." Marcia nodded, standing up from her chair. She felt the weight of the moment, but it wasn't the crushing weight of guilt or uncertainty. It was a weight that came with knowing she had done what was necessary. As she turned to leave the office, the door swinging shut behind her, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the screen, and a small smile tugged at her lips as she saw the message from Kayla. "Are you home yet, Grandma?" It was a simple message, but it felt like a lifeline. Her granddaughter was still young, still innocent to the battles and complexities that had shaped Marcia's life. Kayla was the future, the one who would understand what truly mattered. Not power for the sake of it, but the legacy you leave behind. Marcia tucked the phone back into her pocket and stepped out into the bright daylight. The weight of the trust was now shifted, irrevocably, and Kendall would have to live with the consequences of her actions. But there was more to Marcia's plan than just this. More steps to take, more groundwork to lay. And as the sun bathed her in its warmth, Marcia knew this was just the beginning. The game had changed, and this time, she wasn't going to let anyone forget who had built it. The trust revision sat in front of Kendall, the thick envelope still unopened. She had left Marcia's office earlier that day with a mix of emotions, a raw cocktail of disbelief, anger, and shame that she couldn't quite shake. She had replayed the conversation over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of how she had been blindsided. But it wasn't just the trust itself that haunted her. It was the realization that she had been so naive, so certain of her place. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid the paper out of the envelope, the weight of it feeling like a final sentence. It was time to face the reality that Marcia had set in motion. Time to understand just how deeply the shift had gone. Kendall's eyes scanned the document quickly, each line blurring in her mind. The usual clauses, the typical language. Kayla as the primary heir, Kendall's removal. She had expected this. But then, buried deep in the last few pages, she saw something that stopped her cold. Respect is a requirement, not a request. The words leapt off the page, their meaning sharp and unyielding. Kendall's breath caught as she reread the clause, her fingers tightening around the paper as a mix of confusion and fury roiled inside her. Was this it? Was this the final blow? No conditions, no loopholes. Just that simple, brutal sentence. She had always thought respect was something that came naturally, that it was a given, an unspoken understanding between them. But here it was, written in ink, a demand from Marcia, one that Kendall had never been able to meet. Her hands shaking, Kendall slammed the document down on her desk, the sound echoing through the quiet office. She wasn't going to sit with this. She wasn't going to let this humiliation sit unanswered. The door to Marcia's office was open, as it always was. Kendall marched toward it, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, her chest tight with anger. She didn't care who saw her, didn't care about the whispers behind her back. This was her fight, and she was going to win it. Marcia was seated at her desk, her back to the door. The moment Kendall stepped into the room, she knew her mother had heard the change in her steps, the purposeful stride. Still, Marcia didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her arrival. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope waiting to snap. "I've read the trust revision," Kendall said, her voice cold but laced with a raw edge. "And I've read that clause." Her eyes bore into Marcia's back, her fists clenched at her sides. "Do you really think I don't know what this is? You're making a point. You're trying to humiliate me." Marcia's chair creaked slightly as she finally turned to face Kendall, her expression calm, unreadable. She didn't speak, just waited. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, met her daughter's. Kendall didn't wait for permission. She leaned across the desk, slamming the paper down in front of Marcia, her finger pointing to the clause. This is what you've reduced me to. Respect is a requirement?" Her voice cracked as she said the words. "How dare you?" Marcia's gaze never wavered, her face an implacable mask. She didn't react to Kendall's anger, didn't flinch or raise her voice. She remained steady, unmoving, as though everything Kendall was saying meant nothing. After a long pause, Marcia spoke, her voice quiet but cutting. "Read it." She gestured to the building sign behind her, where ML Holdings gleamed in neat, confident letters on the wall. Her eyes, now colder than ever, fixed on Kendall. "Read it, and understand. The power's been in my hands all along. You've just never seen it." Kendall froze, her mind scrambling to keep up with the realization. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The weight of Marcia's words, of the clause, of the trust revision, it all pressed down on her in that instant, and she couldn't move. Her fingers flexed, aching to lash out, to fight, to make some kind of statement. But in the quiet of that office, with the weight of Marcia's steady gaze on her, Kendall couldn't muster the strength. She looked at the sign, at the gleaming letters that had always been a quiet backdrop to her life, the backdrop she had never questioned. ML Holdings. It wasn't just a company. It wasn't just a building. It was the foundation of everything she had assumed was hers. And now, she was the outsider. Kendall's breath was tight in her chest, her hands trembling at her sides. She couldn't look at Marcia anymore. She couldn't stand there and pretend this was just another argument. This was something different. This was the end of her illusion. She turned sharply, her footsteps rapid and sharp as she stormed out of Marcia's office, the door slamming behind her. The sound of it reverberated in the hallway. But in the silence that followed, it was like the final toll of a bell. As she walked toward her own office, her mind a swirl of disbelief and shame, Kendall didn't see the curious glances that followed her. She didn't notice the conversations that hushed as she passed, the whispers that began to spread through the office like wildfire. What she didn't hear, what she didn't notice, was the HR representative walking toward her. A quiet, professional voice called out to her as she entered the hallway. "Kendall, we've scheduled a sensitivity workshop for leadership." Kendall didn't stop. She didn't answer. She simply kept walking, her world crashing down around her, her steps growing more uncertain with each passing moment. And when she reached her office, she locked the door behind her, staring out the window at the world she no longer understood. The silence in the room was suffocating, and it wasn't just her own reflection she saw in the glass. It was the reflection of someone she didn't recognize, someone who had failed. The quarterly report landed on every desk, just as it did every 3 months, a polished package of numbers and projections. But this one, the one that Marcia had signed off on, was different. It was more than just financials. It was a quiet declaration. ML Holdings was now listed as the principal landlord of the company's headquarters. The report spread like wildfire through the office, passed from one person to another with growing disbelief. Staff members gathered in small clusters, murmuring to one another, scanning the page as if expecting to find an error, a mistake. But it was there, bold and unmissable. The name ML Holdings, Marcia's LLC, in the principal landlord section, standing at the top of the report like a quiet but unmistakable banner. The realization began to sink in. The building, the very one they had worked in for years, was owned by Marcia. And no one, not even Kendall, had known until now. Kendall stood by her desk, frozen, her fingers hovering over the report in front of her. She had expected things to be bad, but this? This was a quiet earthquake, and the tremors were already reverberating through the office. Her mind was a blur, racing to make sense of the implications. She glanced up, hoping to see a familiar face, but the room was filled with whispers. People who had always seen her as the leader, the confident VP, now looked at her with something between curiosity and pity. The foundation of her entire world was crumbling in front of her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Rick Farrow's voice broke the silence, his presence cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. "Kendall," he said as he approached her, his voice steady, "we need to talk." Kendall's throat tightened, and she nodded. She had been dreading this moment. She had known something like this would come. The power Marcia had built, quietly, steadily, had finally been exposed for what it was. And now Kendall was left to clean up the mess. Rick led her into one of the conference rooms, away from the curious eyes of the staff. He didn't sit down, just paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. "It's official," he said. "Marcia is now part of the advisory board. Her stake in the company and the building, it's undeniable now, and frankly, it's time we start seeing her for what she really is." Kendall felt a cold rush of disbelief flood over her. She could barely keep her composure. "Part of the advisory board?" Her voice faltered slightly. "You can't be serious." Rick stopped pacing, finally facing her. His gaze was steady, but there was no warmth in it. "It's done, Kendall. I know you've worked hard, but Marcia's contributions are substantial. Her ownership of the building? That's not just a piece of paper. It's leverage. And the fact that she's been operating under everyone's radar for years, it changes everything." Kendall swallowed hard, the words like gravel in her throat. She wasn't ready for this. She hadn't expected her own mother to become the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. the one with the quiet power that had outlasted everything Kendall had built. The realization struck her hard. Marcia had been running the show the entire time. As she turned to leave the room, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity, Kendall's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name. Kayla. "Mom's been talking about you. We're so proud of you. I'm turning in my paper about the building today." Kendall's fingers trembled as she tapped the screen, reading the message. Kayla, so innocent, so unaware of the depths of the chaos her family had been plunged into. It felt like the final blow, a reminder of everything Kendall had lost and everything Marcia had already built for her future. The finality of it hit her all at once, but there was no time to dwell. The world was moving around her, and she was standing still, paralyzed by the consequences of her own choices. She didn't reply to Kayla's message. There was nothing she could say. The buzz of the office continued, the whispers growing louder now. People had already started to piece it together, the truth unraveling around her. The sense of power, the image of control she had built so carefully in the office, was slipping away. Kendall walked back to her desk, her thoughts scattered, her head pounding. She had to act. She had to do something. She couldn't let Marcia's quiet dominance go unchallenged. But deep down, she knew. It was too late. The phone on her desk rang, snapping her from her thoughts. She picked it up, almost mechanically. "Kendall, it's HR," the voice on the other end said. "We've scheduled the sensitivity workshop for leadership. It's mandatory." Kendall didn't respond. She just set the phone down slowly, her fingers pressing against her temples. The weight of it all was too much to bear. She had expected the fallout from the gala, from the trust revision. But now, this? This felt like the end of the world she had built. As she sat at her desk, staring out the window, the truth settled in. She wasn't in control. Not anymore. The world had shifted, and Kendall was no longer the one at the helm. Just as she thought it couldn't get worse, a notification flashed on her screen. Local business journal. The part-time woman who owned it all. Kendall's hands gripped the edge of the desk as the headline stared back at her. She closed her eyes, fighting the surge of emotion that rose inside her. This was it. The final nail in the coffin. She couldn't stay here. Not like this. Kendall skipped the holiday follow-up meeting. It was the only thing she could do. The office was quiet, the usual afternoon rush subdued by the weight of the events that had unfolded over the past few days. Marcia sat at her desk, the light from the window casting a soft glow across her workspace, but her mind was far from the numbers and projections before her. She had been silent for days, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she needed to pause and gather the pieces of her life that were still intact. The world had shifted. Kendall had made her own choices, and Marcia had taken the necessary steps to ensure the company and her legacy would remain secure. But there was one thing she hadn't anticipated: how deeply she had missed the connection with Kayla, how much her granddaughter's innocence had become a balm to her weary soul. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Kayla. She opened it quickly, her fingers shaking slightly as she read the words. "I'm proud to be your granddaughter. Even if Mom doesn't get it." Marcia's heart clenched in her chest. It wasn't just the words that got to her. It was the simplicity of them. The raw honesty of a child who, despite everything, understood in a way that her own daughter had not. Marcia closed her eyes for a moment, letting the emotion wash over her. The tears that followed were silent, slow, as though they had been waiting for years to be released. She hadn't cried in a long time, not since her divorce, not since she had built everything up on her own. The walls she had erected had been for survival, for strength. But now, as she sat alone in the quiet of her office, the tears fell. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of relief. of gratitude for what she had built, and of acknowledgement for the love that had been hidden in plain sight. Marcia wiped her eyes, her hand trembling slightly. She stood and walked to the small closet in the corner of the office, where a stack of old family photos sat untouched, buried under years of business plans and financial records. She pulled out the top one, the picture of Kayla as a little girl, her eyes wide with innocence and pride. A thought settled in her mind as she looked at the photo. She had been so focused on protecting the legacy that she hadn't considered who it was really for. The answer was clear now. She picked up the phone and dialed Kayla's number. "Grandma?" Kayla's voice came through, light and bright. "What's up?" Marcia smiled through the tightness in her throat. "How about we go out for lunch today? Just the two of us." Her voice was gentle but firm in its warmth. No talk of business, just fries and milkshakes. Kayla laughed, the sound so familiar and comforting that Marcia could almost picture her granddaughter's grin. "That sounds perfect." Within an hour, they were sitting in a small diner on the outskirts of town, tucked into a booth by the window. The sun streamed in, casting everything in a soft glow. Kayla's eyes sparkled as she dug into her fries, barely pausing to speak between bites. Marcia watched her, her heart light for the first time in what felt like forever. No more business. No more power struggles. Just the joy of being with someone who truly understood what mattered. They ate in comfortable silence, and for a brief moment Marcia allowed herself to forget everything else. The company, the decisions, the weight of the trust. She was here, with Kayla, and that was all that mattered. As they finished, Marcia asked for the check, her hand lingering over her purse. Kayla reached over and grabbed the napkin that Marcia had absent-mindedly placed beside her. She scribbled something on it, then slid it over to Marcia. Marcia unfolded it. There, in Kayla's childish handwriting, was the simplest of notes. "I'm proud of you, Grandma, even if no one else gets it." Marcia's eyes blurred for a moment, the note a stark reminder of how much she had worked to protect. It was never about the business, the building, or the money. It was about the legacy she would leave behind, the one that would be remembered, not for power, but for love and connection. And in that moment, Marcia knew that it wasn't just Kayla who needed her. She needed Kayla. She needed the innocence, the simplicity, the reminder that there was more to life than strategy and silent victories. When they finished their lunch, Marcia led Kayla back to the car, feeling the lightness of the day settle over her. As they drove back to Marcia's house, Marcia made a decision. She knew what had to be done next, a final piece of the puzzle. That evening, after Kayla had gone home, Marcia sat down at her desk, the trust revision in front of her once more. This time, there was no hesitation. She picked up the pen and made the final change. Just as she had done with everything else in her life, deliberately and with love. She crossed out Kendall's name once more and wrote Kayla's instead. Then, as the last step, Marcia handed Kayla the first ledger, the first step toward the future she would one day inherit. The foundation of everything was now complete, and with it, Marcia could finally breathe, knowing that Kayla would be the one to carry it forward. Her legacy, in the truest sense, was secured. The rooftop of the building was quiet in the early morning light, the hum of the city far below softened by the solitude of the space. Marcia sat at the edge, her legs crossed comfortably, looking out over the skyline of Dallas. The sky was still a pale blue, the first traces of sunlight filtering through the edges of the clouds. It felt like the world had paused, just for a moment, allowing her to breathe. This was her building. Her building. For years she had worked in the shadows, never asking for attention, never demanding the credit that was so easily given to others. But now, as the sun rose higher in the sky, Marcia could feel the weight of her choices, of her actions, of everything she had built, settling into place. The city below was a different place now, one that would remember her name long after she was gone. She had kept her hours part-time, but she had never relinquished her power. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She turned her head to see the first of the staff arriving, their figures small against the backdrop of the building. They passed under the newly installed sign above the entrance, Lynn and Partners, a division of ML Holdings. No fanfare, no press release, just presence. Marcia smiled faintly as she watched them enter the building, none of them fully aware of the significance of what had changed. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need their recognition. This was hers, quietly and definitively hers, and in time, they would all understand. A small voice broke through her reverie. "Grandma?" She turned, and there was Kayla, standing at the edge of the rooftop, her school bag slung over her shoulder, her face lighting up when she saw Marcia. The innocence in her granddaughter's eyes, the unwavering trust, made everything worth it. This was the legacy Marcia had fought for. This was the future. Kayla rushed over, her arms wrapping around Marcia in a hug that felt like home, like everything was right in the world. Marcia hugged her back, pulling her close, feeling the weight of the years fall away. "I'm so proud of you, Grandma," Kayla whispered, her voice muffled against Marcia's chest. Marcia smiled, feeling a tear threaten, but she held it back. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart." They stayed like that for a long moment, the world around them fading into the background. When Kayla finally pulled away, she smiled up at Marcia. "I have to go to school, but I'll be back later, okay?" Marcia nodded, watching as her granddaughter waved and walked toward the elevator. The world felt clearer, simpler in that moment. It was a reminder that the work she had done, the battles she had fought, had all been for this, the future, the legacy that would endure. As the elevator doors closed, Marcia turned her attention back to the street below. The morning rush was picking up now, cars moving in steady streams, people bustling to their destinations. And yet, in this moment, Marcia remained still, a quiet force on her rooftop, untouched by the noise. But just as the peace settled over her, a figure walked into her line of sight. It was Kendall. She walked past the building entrance, her head down, her steps slow. She didn't look up as she passed beneath the sign, but Marcia could see the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders were tight, as if carrying the weight of something far heavier than she let on. Kendall didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge Marcia's presence. She just kept walking, her gaze fixed firmly on the ground ahead of her. Marcia's lips curled slightly, the smallest hint of satisfaction mixed with the sorrow she felt. The woman who had once mocked her, who had laughed at her efforts, was now a shadow of what she had once been. Marcia stood, the weight of everything finally settling within her. She turned to face the skyline once again, the building's new name lingering in her mind. The world might have seen Kendall as the one in charge, the one who commanded attention, but the truth was always different. Power wasn't about titles. It wasn't about being seen. It was about what was quietly built, in silence, without the need for anyone else's approval. Marcia straightened, her hands resting on the edge of the rooftop. She inhaled deeply, her mind clear, her resolve firm. There was no need for words. The power she had fought for, quiet, unyielding, was now unmistakable. She looked down at the street one last time, watching the city that had once seemed so distant, so vast, now feel like her domain. "I kept my hours part-time," Marcia murmured to herself, "but not my power." Her gaze flicked over the sign once more, and with a soft exhale she whispered the final line of the story. My daughter laughed. "She still works part-time. The company party was hosted in my name." And with that, Marcia knew her legacy had been sealed.